Victoria Sterling's Lexus glided through the wrought iron gates of her Beverly Hills estate at 3:47 on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 hours earlier than any workday in the past 8 months. The mansion rose before her like a monument to everything she'd built. 12,000 square feet of limestone and glacis, perfectly manicured hedges flanking the circular drive, a fountain centerpiece that cost more than most people earned in a year. She'd purchased the property 6 years ago, back when her tech company Pinnacle had just crossed the billion-dollar threshold and the world seemed full of conquerable territories. Now the house felt less like an achievement and more like a mausoleum, beautiful and cold and haunted by the ghost of a life she'd once imagined living. The board meeting that morning had run long, 3 hours of quarterly projections and acquisition talks that blurred into white noise somewhere around hour 2. Robert Chen, her CFO, had droned on about market positioning while Victoria's phone buzzed silently in her lap. 4 texts from Owen's day nurse, each one a variation on the same theme. Your son is asking for you. She'd silenced the notifications without reading past the first line, the way she always did, because reading them fully meant acknowledging what she couldn't fix. And Victoria Sterling had built an empire on solving problems, not dwelling on impossible equations. But somewhere between Robert's discussion of projected returns and the investor relations manager's presentation on stakeholder confidence, Victoria had stood up mid-sentence, gathered her tablet and briefcase, and walked out of the conference room without explanation. Her assistant Sarah had chased her to the elevator, breathless and confused, asking if she needed to reschedule the afternoon calls. Victoria had simply said no, drive home, leaving Sarah standing in the hallway with her mouth half open and a pen frozen above her notepad. Now Victoria sat in her car in the driveway, engine still running, staring at her own front door like it belonged to a stranger's house. The digital clock on the dashboard blinked 3:49, then 3:50. Inside that house was her son, 6 years old, confined to a wheelchair, his small body slowly betraying him one muscle group at a time, thanks to a genetic defect called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. The doctors had explained it to her when Owen was 4. A progressive disease, no cure, average life expectancy 25 to 30 years if he was lucky. They'd use phrases like supportive care and quality of life management, words that felt like euphemisms for we can't help him, we can only watch him decline. Victoria had responded the way she always did to obstacles, by throwing money at the problem. She'd hired 4 round-the-clock nurses, brought in specialists from Johns Hopkins and Stanford, installed a fully equipped medical wing in the east portion of the house with physical therapy equipment that cost more than luxury cars. She'd paid for every experimental treatment, every promising study, every expert consultation that might offer even a sliver of hope. And when none of it worked, and when Owen continued to grow weaker despite the small army of professionals surrounding him, Victoria had done the only thing she knew how to do. She'd worked harder, stayed later at the office, buried herself in deals and strategy sessions, and anything that didn't require her to sit in her son's room and watch him struggle to lift a spoon. Her ex-husband Marcus had called it abandonment when he'd filed for divorce 18 months ago. He'd stood in this same driveway, suitcase in hand, and told her she was choosing the company over their child, that she'd become so terrified of her own helplessness that she'd rather pretend Owen didn't exist than face what was happening to him. Victoria had let him go without a fight, had signed the divorce papers with the same efficient detachment she brought to quarterly reports, had written the check for his half of their assets, and told herself she was better off alone. Marcus had moved to New York, started a new architecture firm, sent regular child support payments, but never called, never visited. Owen had stopped asking about his father after 6 months, the way children learn to stop picking at wounds that won't heal. Victoria finally cut the engine and stepped out of the car, her heels clicking against the cobblestone drive. The November air carried that peculiar Los Angeles quality of sunshine without warmth, bright and hollow. She walked to the front door, pressed her thumb to the biometric lock. She'd had it installed after the divorce, another layer of control in a life that felt increasingly uncontrollable, and stepped into the marble-floored foyer. The house was silent in that particular way expensive homes are silent, the kind of quiet that comes from good insulation and rooms too large to echo. Victoria set her briefcase by the console table, slipped off her heels, and started toward the grand staircase that led to the second floor where Owen's bedroom and medical wing occupied the entire south wing. She was halfway up when she heard it. Laughter. Real laughter. Bright and full of life. The sound a 6-year-old boy should make, but that Victoria hadn't heard from her son in 8 months. Not since Marcus Hayes, the janitor, had started working here. Victoria froze on the landing, one hand on the brass railing. The laugh came again, floating down the hallway from Owen's room, followed by a man's voice, low and warm, saying something she couldn't quite make out. Her pulse kicked up, not quite alarm, but something close to it. A mother's instinct that told her something was happening in her house that she didn't understand and hadn't authorized. She moved down the hallway on silent feet, the thick carpet absorbing her footsteps. Owen's door stood half open, a slice of afternoon light cutting across the hardwood floor. Victoria stopped just outside, positioning herself where she could see through the gap without being seen, and what she witnessed made her forget to breathe. Marcus Hayes knelt on the floor beside Owen's wheelchair. But that wasn't what made Victoria's blood run cold. It was what Marcus was doing, his rough, calloused hands, the hands of someone who'd spent years pushing mops and carrying trash bins, were guiding Owen through physical therapy exercises with the precision of a trained professional. He'd positioned Owen's small body on a padded mat, one hand supporting the boy's lower back, while the other gently manipulated his right leg, moving it through a careful range of motion that Victoria recognized from the countless sessions she'd paid specialists $400 an hour to perform. Marcus was humming something under his breath, a melody Victoria didn't recognize, and as he worked, he kept up a steady stream of encouragement. "Come on, little man. Remember what we talked about yesterday? You're a brave warrior." Owen's face was scrunched in concentration, his small hands gripping the edge of the mat as he tried to hold his position. Marcus shifted his grip, his fingers finding pressure points along Owen's calf, with a certainty that spoke of knowledge, real medical knowledge, not just someone making it up as they went. What made Victoria's heart stop wasn't just the physical therapy itself, it was the terminology Marcus used as he worked. He was talking about muscle groups, extension techniques, spasticity management, words that Victoria had only ever heard from the expensive specialists in their white coats and pristine scrubs. "Passive range of motion," Marcus said, adjusting Owen's ankle. "We're targeting the gastrocnemius here, buddy, keeping that Achilles tendon from getting too tight." Owen giggled as Marcus tickled the bottom of his foot, testing reflexes. "That's it, perfect response. You're getting stronger every day, Owen. I can feel it." And the worst part, the part that made Victoria want to either storm into the room or run back down the stairs and pretend she'd never come home early, was that Owen's face was radiant, lit up in a way she hadn't seen since before the diagnosis, since back when he was just a normal little boy who didn't know words like dystrophy or prognosis or palliative care. Victoria stood in the hallway for 15 minutes, watching through the crack, cataloging every movement Marcus made. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't improvising. He was conducting a legitimate physical therapy session with the kind of skill that took years of training to develop. When he finished, he helped Owen back into his wheelchair with a gentleness that made Victoria's throat tighten, then high-fived the boy and said, "Same time tomorrow, warrior. We're going to get you so strong you'll be doing backflips by Christmas." Owen's laugh rang out again, pure and unself-conscious. Marcus ruffled his hair, grabbed the cleaning supplies he'd left by the door, maintaining the illusion that he was here to work, not to treat her son, and turned toward the hallway. Victoria had approximately 3 seconds to decide whether to confront him or retreat. She chose confrontation. She stepped into the doorway, blocking his exit, her face arranged in the expression she used for hostile board meetings: cold, controlled, radiating authority. Marcus stopped short, his blue eyes widening fractionally before he caught himself and straightened his shoulders. Up close, Victoria could see the details she'd missed on the handful of occasions she'd passed him in the hallways over the past 6 months. The way his brown hair was perpetually tousled, like he'd been running his hands through it. The slight stoop to his shoulders from years of physical labor. The calluses on his palms that spoke of a life spent doing things with his hands rather than delegating them to others. "We need to talk," Victoria said, her voice flat. "Now." Marcus glanced back at Owen, who was watching them both with wide eyes, then nodded. Yes, ma'am. He followed Victoria down the hallway and down the stairs to the kitchen, a massive space of marble countertops and professional-grade appliances that a private chef used twice a week and that otherwise sat pristine and unused, too large and too perfect for actual life to happen inside it. Victoria turned to face him, arms crossed. She'd left her shoes upstairs, which put her at 5'7" to his 5'11". Just enough height difference to make her feel at a disadvantage she resented. What exactly did you think you were doing up there? Marcus set down his cleaning supplies carefully, like he was buying himself time to formulate an answer. His hands, she noticed, were shaking slightly. Ma'am, I can explain. Explain? Victoria's voice rose despite her efforts to keep it level. You were playing doctor with my son without my permission. You're a janitor, Mr. Hayes. You clean floors and empty trash bins. You don't touch my child, and you certainly don't perform medical procedures on him. Something flickered across Marcus's face. Hurt, maybe, or anger quickly suppressed. I wasn't hurting him. That's not the point. Victoria stepped closer, using her physical presence the way she'd learned to in boardrooms full of men who underestimated her. The point is, you overstepped your role in a way that could have serious consequences. What if you'd injured him? What if something had gone wrong? I could sue you for everything you have, which I'm guessing isn't much, and then what? Your daughter would pay the price for your arrogance? Marcus's jaw tightened. Leave Lily out of this. Then explain to me where a janitor learned physical therapy techniques that look suspiciously professional. Victoria watched his face, looking for tells, for the micro-expressions that signaled deception. She'd built her career on reading people, on knowing when someone across the negotiating table was bluffing, or when a competitor was about to make a move. But Marcus's face remained neutral, giving away nothing except a deep weariness that seemed bone deep. My daughter was born with developmental challenges, Marcus said finally, his voice low but steady. Autism, motor delays. My wife Elena, before she died, she was an occupational therapist. She taught me everything she knew so I could help Lily at home. We couldn't afford professional therapy sessions for 6 years straight, so I learned. I became my daughter's therapist because I had to. The words landed in the space between them like stones dropping into still water. Victoria processed the information, slotting it into categories: relevant, useful, potentially exploitable. She'd known Marcus had a daughter. It had been on his employment application. 8-year-old daughter, no custody issues. But she hadn't known about the autism, hadn't cared enough to ask. She hired people through an agency that vetted them. Their personal stories were none of her concern, as long as they showed up on time and did their jobs. That doesn't give you the right to treat Owen, Victoria said, but some of the edge had left her voice. You should have asked permission. I know. Marcus looked down at his hands, those rough, capable hands that had just guided her son through exercises with more expertise than the last specialist she'd paid. I'm sorry, it's just Owen was struggling. He was sad. He'd lost all motivation. The nurses are good people, but they do their jobs and leave. Nobody was really talking to him, you know? Nobody was making him feel like he could actually get better, like he was more than just a sick kid waiting to get worse. Victoria opened her mouth to snap back that she paid people to make Owen feel better, that there were 4 professionals on staff specifically to provide that kind of support, but the words died in her throat because she knew they'd be a lie. The nurses did their jobs competently and professionally, but they were employees, not family, and children could tell the difference. And Victoria herself hadn't spent more than 20 minutes at a time in Owen's room in months, couldn't bear to watch him struggle, couldn't face the daily evidence of her own powerlessness. Mom, the small voice from the kitchen doorway made both adults turn. Owen sat in his electric wheelchair, maneuvering it with the joystick control he'd mastered months ago. His blonde curls were mussed from lying on the therapy mat, his green eyes bright and alert in a way Victoria hadn't seen in recent memory. His posture was different too, she realized. He was sitting straighter, shoulders back, instead of hunched forward in the defeated slump that had become his default position. You're home early, Owen said, and there was something in his voice, not quite accusation, but close, like he was pointing out an anomaly that required explanation. I finished work early today. Victoria knelt down to his level, an instinct she hadn't realized she still possessed. She reached out and touched his hair, soft and fine beneath her fingers. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "Good." Owen glanced past her at Marcus, then back to his mother. "Marcus was teaching me exercises. He says I'm getting stronger." His voice carried a hope so fragile Victoria was afraid to breathe too hard near it. "That's wonderful, honey." The words felt inadequate, like she was reading from a script for a role she'd never learned to play. "Why don't you go watch your tablet for a while? I need to talk to Marcus about grown-up things." "Are you mad at him?" Owen's directness, the way children ask the questions adults learn to dress up in euphemisms, caught Victoria off guard. "No, I'm not mad, just discussing work stuff. Now, go on, I'll come check on you in a bit." Owen hesitated, his small face serious. "Don't fire him, Mom. Please. He's the only one who makes me feel like I'm not broken." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs. She managed to keep her face neutral, managed to smile and nod and wait until Owen wheeled himself out of the kitchen before she let herself react. When he was gone, she braced both hands against the marble countertop, head bowed, eyes closed, fighting for control over the emotion that threatened to surface. Grief or rage or guilt, or some toxic combination of all three. Behind her, Marcus stayed silent. Smart man, Victoria thought distantly, giving her space to collect herself, not pushing, not offering empty platitudes. When she finally lifted her head and turned around, her face was composed again, the mask back in place. "Tell me about your wife," she said. Not a request. Marcus leaned against the opposite counter, maintaining the distance between them. "Elena and I met at Cal State LA in 2009. She was 2 years older, studying occupational therapy. I was pre-med, barely scraping by on student loans and a job stocking shelves overnight. She tutored me in anatomy, and somewhere between memorizing muscle groups and arguing about the correct pronunciation of sternocleidomastoid, I fell in love." He said it without romanticism, just stating facts. But Victoria heard the loss underneath. "We got married in 2011, right after she graduated. Money was tight, but we were happy, you know? Then Lily came along in 2012, and for the first 18 months, everything was normal. Then the pediatrician started noticing delays, no eye contact, no social smiling, repetitive behaviors. Autism spectrum disorder, moderate severity." Marcus paused, his gaze drifting to something Victoria couldn't see, some memory playing behind his eyes. "Elena quit her job at a pediatric clinic where she was making decent money. Decided to work with Lily full-time. I dropped out of school, was 1 year from graduating, and took construction jobs, whatever paid. At night I studied online, took classes when I could. Took me 4 years part-time, but I got my bachelor's in occupational therapy in 2017. So you have a degree." Victoria processed this information, recategorizing Marcus in her mental filing system. "Then why are you working as a janitor?" "Because 67 hospitals, clinics, and private practices told me no." Marcus's voice remained level, but Victoria caught the edge beneath it. "No clinical hours," they said. "No experience in high-end settings." Several places told me outright that their clients were more comfortable with female therapists. A few suggested that being a single father made me unreliable, like I'd be calling in sick constantly to take care of Lily. "That's illegal," Victoria said automatically. "Gender discrimination, parental status discrimination." "Sure, you want to fund the lawsuit? Because I had a 6-year-old daughter who just lost her mother and medical debt from Elena's cancer treatment and I'm still paying off. The last thing I could afford was a lawyer to fight for a job I didn't get." Cancer. The word explained the timeline gaps Victoria was starting to notice. When? Elena was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer in July 2018. Lily had just turned 6. Marcus's voice went flat, the way people's voices do when they're recounting trauma they've had to tell too many times. 14 months of treatment, surgery, chemo, radiation, experimental drugs we begged insurance to cover. We maxed out at $340,000 in medical debt by the time she died in March 2020, right before COVID hit. Lily was 7, didn't understand why mommy stopped coming home. I tried to explain, but how do you make a child with autism understand death when they already struggle with abstract concepts? Victoria said nothing. There was nothing to say to that, no words that wouldn't sound like meaningless platitudes. She'd lost her own father at 16, Knew the way grief carved out spaces inside you that never quite filled in again. But she'd been neurotypical and nearly an adult. She couldn't imagine processing that loss through the filter of autism at 7 years old. After Elena died, I applied for every OT job I could find. 67 applications over 6 months. 67 rejections. Marcus met her eyes, and Victoria saw something in his expression that looked like surrender without defeat. So I took what I could get, janitorial work through an agency that hired on the spot and didn't care about my lack of clinical hours. The pay was terrible, but the hours were flexible enough that I could drop Lily at school and pick her up, be there when she had meltdowns or needed help with homework. And at night after she went to bed, I could pretend for a few hours that I was the therapist I trained to be by helping kids whose parents couldn't afford professional care. That's when Victoria understood. You volunteer somewhere, St. Catherine's Community Center in East LA. Marcus straightened, a hint of pride entering his voice. I asked Father Miguel if I could use a back room that wasn't being used. Started with 3 kids from the neighborhood. Now I've got 14, 3 nights a week. Cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, autism, developmental delays. I can't legally practice as a licensed therapist without clinical hours on my record, but I can teach exercise classes as a volunteer. It's a legal gray area, but it lets me help. Victoria walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the manicured gardens that a landscaping crew maintained twice a week. The late afternoon sun turned the pool to molten gold, beautiful and untouched. Owen couldn't swim anymore. Hadn't been in the water in over a year. She'd kept meaning to drain it, cover it, eliminate the reminder of what he'd lost. But that felt like admitting defeat, so she left it, a monument to past possibilities. You've been doing this with Owen for how long? 6 months, since I started working here. Marcus's reflection appeared in the window beside hers. At first it was just little things, helping him reach something, talking to him while I cleaned his room. He was so sad. Mrs. Sterling, a 6-year-old kid alone all day except for nurses who treated him like a patient instead of a person. I started stretching his legs while we talked, showing him simple exercises. He responded, started smiling more, sitting up straighter. So I kept going, without asking permission. Without asking permission, Marcus agreed, because I knew if I asked, you'd say no. You'd worry about liability, about what your lawyers would say, about what would happen if something went wrong. And I get that. I really do. But Owen needed help right then, not after the paperwork cleared. Victoria turned to face him. What you're describing is assault, touching someone's child without consent. What I'm describing is therapy. There's a difference, not legally, maybe not, but morally, ethically. Marcus stepped closer and Victoria found herself not backing away, holding her ground even though something about his intensity made her want to retreat. Your son was dying inside, and nobody was doing anything about it. All the fancy specialists in the world can't fix a kid who's given up hope. I gave him hope. That's not assault, that's compassion. The word hung between them, sharp and accusing. Victoria felt something twist in her chest, anger maybe, or shame, or that particular brand of fury that comes from someone pointing out a truth you've been trying to avoid. She opened her mouth to put him in his place, to remind him that he was an employee talking to his employer, and that compassion was a lovely sentiment that didn't trump legal liability or parental authority. When her phone buzzed in her pocket, she pulled it out, glanced at the screen. Robert Chen, probably calling about her unexplained departure from the board meeting. She sent it to voicemail, then looked back at Marcus, her janitor, her son's unauthorized therapist, the man who'd apparently been conducting a secret rehabilitation program in her own house for 6 months, while she buried herself in quarterly earnings reports. I should fire you, Victoria said. For a dozen reasons, I should call the agency right now and have you removed from this property. You should. Marcus didn't flinch from her gaze. And you probably will. But before you do, come with me tomorrow night. See what I do at St. Catherine's. Meet the kids I work with. Then decide whether what I'm doing is criminal or whether maybe, just maybe, I'm trying to fill a gap in a broken system that leaves children behind because their parents can't afford treatment. Victoria's phone buzzed again. Robert, persistent as always. You're very proud of yourself, Mr. Hayes. No, ma'am, I'm really not. Marcus picked up his cleaning supplies, preparing to leave. But I'm sure about what I do. I'm sure that those kids need help. And I'm sure that your son is happier and stronger than he was 6 months ago. And you haven't even noticed because you haven't been around to see it. The words should have made her furious, should have triggered her impulse to destroy anyone who dared challenge her. The same impulse that had helped her climb from middle management to CEO in 12 years. But instead, they just made her tired, a weariness that went deeper than the physical exhaustion from 18-hour workdays and constant stress. Marcus was right. She hadn't noticed Owen's improvement because she'd been too busy not noticing Owen at all. Tomorrow night, Victoria heard herself say. What time? Sessions start at 7, run until 9. Marcus was already moving toward the door, putting distance between them like he didn't trust this tentative truce. St. Catherine's on 4th Street in East LA. You can't miss it. It's the building with peeling paint and a chain-link fence. The kind of place people like you usually don't go. People like me. Victoria felt the barb but let it pass. She'd been called worse in boardrooms by men who resented her success and women who thought she'd betrayed her gender by being too aggressive. Fine, I'll be there at 7. After Marcus left, Victoria stood alone in her enormous kitchen, listening to the silence of her enormous house, and for the first time in 8 months, she let herself cry. Not the controlled, private tears she allowed herself sometimes in the shower or late at night when sleep wouldn't come, but the raw, ugly crying that came from somewhere deeper than reason or pride. She cried for Owen, who'd learned to expect so little from her that 20 minutes of attention felt like a gift. She cried for the little boy she'd been too afraid to watch suffer, and for the mother she'd failed to be in service of being a CEO that shareholders respected. She cried for Marcus's wife Elena, who died fighting cancer while Victoria threw money at a disease that couldn't be bought off. And somewhere in the storm of grief and guilt and exhaustion, she cried for herself, for the woman who'd built an empire but couldn't figure out how to sit in a room with her own son without feeling like she was drowning. When the tears finally stopped, Victoria washed her face at the kitchen sink, dried it with a dish towel that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries, and went upstairs to Owen's room. He was lying in bed, tablet propped on a pillow, watching some cartoon about talking trains. When Victoria entered, he looked up, surprised. She realized with a fresh stab of guilt that he wasn't used to her coming to his room, wasn't expecting her to seek him out. "Can I sit with you?" Victoria asked, and Owen nodded, scooting over to make room on the bed. She lay down beside him, careful not to jostle him, and for a while they just watched the trains together in silence. The show was ridiculous, the kind of mindless children's entertainment that drove adults crazy. But Owen laughed at the jokes, and that sound, her son's laughter, was the most valuable thing in the world. "Mom," Owen said during a commercial break, "are you going to let Marcus keep helping me?" Victoria chose her words carefully. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. What he's doing is complicated, but I promise I'll figure out what's best for you. He makes me feel strong." Owen's voice was small, tentative, like he was afraid stating this fact might somehow break the spell. Like maybe I can get better instead of just getting worse. Victoria pulled him close, this small boy who carried so much weight on such fragile shoulders. "You are strong, Owen. You're the strongest person I know." That night, after Owen fell asleep and the night nurse took over, Victoria went to her home office and did what she always did when faced with incomplete information. She researched. She pulled up Marcus Hayes' employment file first. Bare bones, exactly as he described. High school diploma, some college, gap years that now made sense given what he'd told her about Elena's illness and death. Current address in Burbank, one dependent, clean background check. Nothing that explained the skills she'd witnessed that afternoon, nothing that justified the confidence with which he'd handled her son. Next, she searched for information about St. Catherine's Community Center. The place had minimal online presence, a single page on the church's website listing it as available for community programs, a few photos of the rundown building, a phone number for Father Miguel. Victoria found one local news article from 6 months ago, a human interest piece about volunteer programs serving special needs children in underserved neighborhoods. Catherine's was mentioned in passing, described as a grassroots initiative led by local volunteers providing movement therapy and social support to families who can't, afford traditional services. Movement therapy, not physical therapy, because that would require licensed professionals. The legal gray area Marcus had mentioned. Victoria leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. The corporate lawyer in her saw a dozen liability issues, reasons to shut this down immediately. But another part of her, a part she'd thought she'd successfully buried years ago, saw something else. A man trying to honor his dead wife's legacy by giving back what he couldn't afford to receive, using skills the system refused to recognize because he didn't have the right credentials or the right gender or the right circumstance. Victoria's phone lit up with a text from Robert Chen. Board wants meeting about your early departure. Issues of leadership stability. Thursday, 9 a.m.? She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, can't Thursday. We'll send calendar availability tomorrow. She powered down the phone before he could respond, before the pull of work could drag her back into that familiar current where she could pretend to have control over something. Instead, Victoria pulled up Owen's medical files, the digital records from every specialist consultation, every test result, every therapy session note from the past 2 years. She read them chronologically, watching her son's decline mapped out in clinical language and declining numbers. Muscle strength deterioration, progressive loss of ambulation, increasing dependence on assistive devices. The most recent note from Dr. Blackwood, Owen's neurologist, was dated 3 weeks ago. Patient continues expected disease progression. Recommend maintaining current supportive care protocols. Prognosis unchanged. Then Victoria opened her hidden camera system. She'd had it installed after the divorce, ostensibly for security, but really because control over her environment was the one thing she could maintain when everything else was falling apart. She'd never checked the feeds before, had almost forgotten they existed. Now she pulled up the cameras in Owen's room, scrolled back through 6 months of footage. The first time Marcus appeared in the recordings was in early May, mopping Owen's floor while the boy sat in his wheelchair watching. They were talking, no audio, but Victoria could see Owen's mouth moving, responding to something Marcus said. The conversation lasted 10 minutes, longer than any interaction Owen had with the other staff. The next day, Marcus was back, and this time after finishing the floor, he knelt beside Owen and gently moved the boy's leg through a simple stretch. Owen smiled. Victoria fast-forwarded through weeks of footage, watching Marcus's daily visits evolve from simple conversations to increasingly sophisticated therapy sessions. She saw him bring in homemade equipment, resistance bands fashioned from old exercise tubes, balance boards constructed from cutting boards and tennis balls, foam rollers wrapped in duct-tape towels. Every piece of equipment looked makeshift but functional, the kind of creative problem-solving born from necessity rather than budget. Most striking was the change in Owen himself. Victoria watched her son transform over 6 months from a defeated child slumped in his wheelchair to a boy who sat straighter, smiled more, gauged with enthusiasm during the secret therapy sessions. In the most recent footage from earlier that day, the session Victoria had interrupted, Owen's face glowed with pride when he successfully completed an exercise, and Marcus's expression held the kind of joy Victoria associated with parents watching their children succeed. She was watching a man parent her child with more presence and attention than she'd managed in 2 years. The realization sat heavy in Victoria's chest, making it hard to breathe. She closed the laptop, turned off the office lights, and walked through her silent mansion to the master bedroom suite that took up the entire west wing of the second floor. The room was enormous, decorated by an interior designer in shades of white and cream that were meant to be calming, but that mostly just felt sterile. Victoria changed into pajamas, silk, expensive, purchased by an assistant because she didn't have time to shop, and lay in her king-sized bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow night, she would go to East LA and see Marcus's program for herself. She would gather information, assess the situation, make a decision based on facts rather than emotion. That was what she did: identified problems, analyzed solutions, implemented strategies. Owen was her son, which made the situation more complicated emotionally, but the fundamental approach remained the same. Except this time, the problem wasn't a competitor undercutting her market share or a product launch that needed course correction. The problem was that her 6-year-old son had found more connection with the janitor than with his own mother, and the solution required Victoria to do something she'd spent 8 months avoiding: actually be present for Owen's suffering instead of writing checks to make other people manage it for her. Sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, Victoria dreamed she was back in the boardroom, presenting quarterly projections. But instead of investors, the audience was filled with sick children in wheelchairs. And instead of financial charts, her presentation showed Owen's medical records, disease progression mapped in declining bar graphs, and every child in the room was asking the same question in small, serious voices. Why didn't you come home sooner? Victoria woke at dawn, unrested, and went through her morning routine on autopilot: shower, coffee, review overnight emails from Asian markets, prep for morning calls. But when 8 a.m. rolled around and her calendar alarm reminded her about the executive team meeting, Victoria did something she'd never done in 12 years at Pinnacle. She called Sarah and told her to cancel everything for the day. Sarah's confusion transmitted clearly over the phone. Everything? All meetings? Everything. Victoria heard her own voice as if from a distance, flat and decisive. Reschedule what can be rescheduled. Delegate the rest to Robert. I'm taking a personal day. A long pause. Victoria, in the 3 years Sarah had worked for her, had never once taken a personal day. Are you all right? Fine, family matter. I'll be reachable by email if anything urgent comes up. Victoria ended the call before Sarah could ask more questions, before her assistant's concern could make her second-guess this decision. She spent the morning with Owen, not watching him from the doorway or checking in for 15 minutes between calls, but actually sitting on the floor of his room while he showed her his tablet games, explaining elaborate rules to virtual worlds she didn't understand, but nodded along to because the animation in his voice made something in her chest unclench. Marcus arrived at 9 a.m. for his regular shift, surprise flickering across his face when he saw Victoria in sweatpants and a t-shirt, clothes she normally wore only to the gym on weekends, sitting cross-legged on Owen's floor like she belonged there. Mrs. Sterling. Marcus stood in the doorway holding his cleaning supplies, clearly uncertain whether he should enter or retreat. Come in, Victoria said. I'd like to watch today's session, if that's acceptable. Marcus glanced at Owen, some unspoken communication passing between them, then nodded. Yes, ma'am. He set down his supplies, pulled out the portable therapy mat he'd apparently been storing in the supply closet, and began working with Owen while Victoria watched from her position against the wall. This time, watching with full attention rather than shocked surprise, Victoria saw details she'd missed the day before. Marcus narrated everything he did, explaining to Owen why each movement mattered, how muscles worked, what the goal was. He used technical terms but defined them in kid-friendly language. We're working on your gastrocnemius. That's your calf muscle right here. When it gets too tight, it pulls your foot down. So we stretch it gently, like this, to keep it flexible. Owen listened with focused intensity, asking questions, engaged in his own treatment in a way he'd never been with a professional therapist. Halfway through the session, Marcus positioned Owen on his stomach and began a massage technique Victoria recognized from watching the expensive specialists: myofascial release, working the fascia beneath the skin to release tension. But Marcus accompanied the technical work with stories, turning the therapy into entertainment. So there's this superhero, right? Captain Flexibility. His superpower is being able to stretch into any position, which makes him impossible to trap. But he wasn't always super. He had to train every day, practicing his stretches even when it hurt, even when he wanted to quit. Owen giggled when Marcus worked a particularly tender spot. Did he want to quit? All the time. Marcus's voice was warm, conversational, like they were friends sharing secrets rather than therapist and patient. But he had this wise old mentor, let's call him Master Marcus, who told him something important. Want to know what it was? What? That being strong isn't about never feeling pain. It's about choosing to keep going even when it hurts. Captain Flexibility became a superhero not because he was naturally flexible, but because he decided every day to do the hard work of getting stronger. Owen processed this in silence for a moment, then asked, Am I like Captain Flexibility? You're better, Marcus said simply, because you're doing this in real life, not in a comic book. That makes you an actual superhero, Owen. Victoria watched her son's face transform, watched him internalize this reframing of his daily struggle from tragedy to heroism, and she understood what Marcus had meant the day before. Hope wasn't about denying reality or pretending Owen's disease wasn't serious. Hope was about finding meaning and dignity in the fight itself, about giving a 6-year-old boy a narrative where he was the hero of his own story instead of a victim of genetics. After the session ended and Marcus helped Owen back into his wheelchair, Victoria followed the janitor out into the hallway. "That was remarkable," she said quietly. "The way you engage him, the stories. That's not in any therapy manual I've read." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Elena used to do the same thing. She said kids respond better to stories than to instructions. Make therapy feel like an adventure instead of medicine, and they'll push themselves harder than they thought they could." "Your wife sounds like she was an extraordinary therapist. She was an extraordinary person." Marcus met Victoria's eyes, and she saw grief there, old and familiar, the kind that never fully healed but learned to coexist with daily life. "She died because we couldn't afford the treatment that might have saved her. I live every day knowing that if I'd made different choices, if I'd finished medical school and become a doctor instead of dropping out to work construction, maybe I could have paid for better care. Maybe she'd still be here." The confession hung between them, raw and unguarded. Victoria knew she should say something, offer some platitude about how he'd done his best or how these things weren't his fault. But platitudes felt obscene in the face of that much pain, so instead she simply said, "I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you." Marcus picked up his cleaning supplies again, transitioning back into his role. "I should finish the rest of the house." "About tonight," Victoria said before he could leave. "I'm still coming to St. Catherine's." Marcus nodded. 7 o'clock. "Try not to judge it by Beverly Hills standards. We make do with what we have." After he left, Victoria went back to Owen's room. Her son was drawing at his table, humming the melody Marcus had been singing during therapy. The sound made Victoria's throat tight. She pulled up a chair beside him, watched him color what appeared to be a superhero with extremely flexible limbs. "That's Captain Flexibility," Owen explained without looking up. "He's saving people who are trapped. His flexibility is his superpower. He sounds very brave." Victoria hesitated, then asked, "Are you happy, sweetheart, when Marcus works with you?" Owen set down his crayon and looked at her with those serious green eyes that seemed too old for 6. "I'm happy because Marcus thinks I can get better. Everyone else just feels sorry for me. Even you, Mom. But Marcus doesn't look at me like I'm broken. He looks at me like I'm just training to be stronger." The observation sliced through Victoria's carefully maintained composure. "You're right," she said, her voice unsteady. "I have been looking at you like you're broken. And I'm sorry for that, Owen. You're not broken. You're my incredibly brave, strong, amazing son. And I haven't been telling you that enough." Owen studied her face like he was deciding whether to believe her. Then, with a child's capacity for grace, he simply said, "It's okay, Mom. You can start now." Victoria pulled him into a hug, careful of his fragile body, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and the indefinable smell of childhood. "I love you so much. You know that, right?" "I know." Owen's small arms came around her neck. "I love you too." They stayed like that for a longer time, Victoria kneeling on the floor beside her son's wheelchair, holding him like she should have been doing every day for the past 2 years. Like she promised herself she would do every day from now on, even though part of her knew that promises made in moments of emotional breakthrough were the easiest to break when routine and obligation reasserted themselves. That evening, Victoria told herself she would dress practically for St. Catherine's. Jeans, sneakers, nothing that would make her stand out in East LA. But practical for Victoria still meant designer jeans that cost $400 and a cashmere sweater that cost $6. And when she looked at herself in the mirror, she looked exactly like what she was. A wealthy woman playing dress down, someone who couldn't hide her privilege no matter how casual her clothes. She drove herself in the Lexus, refusing to take the town car and driver that would have been too obviously out of place, though the luxury sedan was only marginally less conspicuous. The GPS took her off the freeway and into neighborhoods that grew progressively more run down, the kind of areas she normally only saw from the freeway or read about in think pieces about urban poverty. By the time she pulled up to St. Catherine's at 6:55 p.m., Victoria felt acutely aware of every marker of wealth she carried. The car, the watch, the automatic way she locked the doors before even getting out, as if poverty were contagious. St. Catherine's looked even more decrepit in person than it had in the photos online. The building had once been white but had weathered to a grayish beige, paint peeling in long strips. The chain-link fence surrounding the small parking lot was bent and rusted in places. Through the grimy windows, Victoria could see lights on and movement inside. She got out of the car, locked it, heard the expensive chirp of the alarm system that cost more than a month's rent in this neighborhood, and walked to the entrance. The door was propped open despite the evening chill. Inside, Victoria found herself in a narrow hallway with scuffed linoleum floors and walls that needed painting. The smell hit her first: industrial cleaner, old building mustiness, and underneath it all, something that reminded her of Owen's medical wing, but without the antiseptic edge. The smell of people, of bodies working hard, of life happening in close quarters. She followed the sound of voices to a large room at the end of the hall. What she saw when she reached the doorway made her stop and simply stare. The room was maybe 40 by 30 feet, with concrete floors partially covered by old wrestling mats and foam padding that looked like it had been salvaged from a gym closing sale. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, one of them making an intermittent buzzing sound. But the inadequacy of the space disappeared when Victoria registered the people filling it. 12 children, ranging in age from maybe 4 to early teens, each with visible disabilities: wheelchairs, leg braces, walkers, the distinctive features of Down syndrome, the rocking movements of autism. And in the center of them all stood Marcus Hayes, wearing athletic pants and a t-shirt instead of his janitor's uniform, kneeling beside a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7, guiding her through what looked like an impossible task, standing up from her wheelchair and taking steps using a walker. Marcus's voice carried across the room, calm and encouraging. "Come on, Maria. We're going for 5 steps today. Just 5. You've already done 4 this week. I know you can do 1 more." The girl, Maria, had her face scrunched in concentration, her small hands gripping the walker with white-knuckled intensity. Her legs trembled with effort, the braces she wore on both legs clicking slightly with each movement. Around her, the other children and their parents had stopped their own activities to watch, a collective holding of breath as Maria attempted something that looked simultaneously mundane and miraculous. 1 step, then 2. Victoria counted silently, her own hands clenching at her sides. 3 steps, Maria's breathing harsh and labored. 4 steps, and the girl's legs started to buckle. Marcus's hands hovered near her, ready to catch but not touching, giving her the dignity of doing this herself. "Last one, Maria. You've got this. Show everyone what you can do." Maria took the 5th step and then collapsed forward. Marcus caught her smoothly, easing her into a sitting position on the mat, and the entire room erupted in applause. Maria's face, streaked with tears of effort, broke into a radiant smile. Victoria watched as the girl's mother, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and hands roughened by work, dropped to her knees beside her daughter, sobbing and laughing simultaneously. "Thank you," the mother said to Marcus, her voice breaking. "Thank you, thank you. 6 months ago, she couldn't stand it all. The doctor said we should just accept it, that therapy was too expensive and she'd never walk anyway. But you never gave up on her." "Maria did the work," Marcus said, but his eyes were bright with emotion. "She's the brave one. We're just here to remind her what she's capable of." Victoria stayed in the doorway for the next 90 minutes, watching Marcus work with each child in turn. She saw him guide a boy with Down syndrome through an obstacle course of foam blocks and balance beams, celebrating each small success with enthusiasm that never felt patronizing. She watched him teach a teenager with cerebral palsy how to strengthen core muscles using exercises that looked simple but clearly required intense concentration. She observed him working with an autistic child who wouldn't make eye contact, using the physical movements as a bridge to connection, narrating everything in a calm, steady voice that seemed to penetrate the boy's walls. But what struck Victoria most wasn't Marcus's technical skill, though that was evident. It was the way he saw these children, not as patients or cases or disabilities to be managed, but as whole people with potential waiting to be unlocked. He knew all their names, knew their siblings' names, asked about school and homework and favorite TV shows. He made them laugh. He made them believe they could do hard things. And hovering around the edges of the room, Victoria noticed the parents, mostly mothers, a few fathers, most of them looking as worn down as the building itself. These were people working multiple jobs, raising children with expensive medical needs on limited budgets, living in the gap between what insurance covered and what therapy actually cost. They watched Marcus with something close to worship, and Victoria understood why. He was giving them something that couldn't be bought, hope wrapped in practical help, delivered with respect and dignity. As the session wound down and families began to leave, an older man in clerical collar approached Victoria. "You must be Mrs. Sterling. I'm Father Miguel. Marcus told me you might visit tonight." Victoria shook his hand. "It's an impressive program you're running here, Father." Father Miguel smiled. "I wish I could take credit, but it's all Marcus's doing. He came to me 18 months ago, asked if I had space he could use, said he wanted to honor his wife's memory by continuing her work. I gave him the key to this room and got out of his way. Since then, he's transformed lives. These families can't afford traditional therapy. We're talking $50 to $200 per session, multiple times a week. Marcus gives them that for free, using equipment he built himself or scrounged from donations. Why doesn't he have a real job in this field?" Victoria asked, then immediately regretted the phrasing. I mean, why isn't he working in an official capacity? Because the system is broken. Father Miguel's voice was gentle but firm. Marcos has a degree, he has skill, he has years of real-world experience caring for his daughter, but he doesn't have clinical hours from an approved institution, and he's a single father, which some places use as an excuse to discriminate. So instead of working in a hospital helping children, he works as a janitor by day and volunteers here at night. It's the world's loss and our community's gain, though I suspect Marcus would rather have the regular job. As families filtered out, expressing gratitude to Marcus and saying goodnight to each other, Victoria finally approached. Marcus was packing away equipment, his t-shirt damp with sweat, his face showing the exhaustion of sustained physical and emotional effort. He looked up when Victoria came near, his expression guarded. "What did you think?" he asked. Victoria chose her words carefully. "I think you're doing something extraordinary here. I think these children are lucky to have you, and I think the medical system that rejected you 67 times is staffed by idiots." A brief smile crossed Marcus's face, surprised and genuine. "That's generous of you to say." "It's not generosity, it's assessment based on observation." Victoria crossed her arms, that familiar gesture of closing herself off when she felt vulnerable. "I watched you work for 90 minutes. You're better with those children than the specialists I pay $400 an hour to work with Owen. You engage them differently. You make them want to succeed instead of just tolerating therapy as something that happens to them." Marcus wiped his face with a towel, then sat down on one of the mats, suddenly looking older than his 34 years. "Thank you. That means something, coming from you." He paused. "I know what you're wondering. You're wondering whether you should let me continue working with Owen, whether the risk outweighs the benefit, whether you can trust someone like me, someone without the right credentials, someone who's been lying by omission for 6 months. Victoria sat down on the mat across from him, not caring that it was probably dirty, that her expensive jeans would need dry cleaning. "Yes, that's what I'm wondering. Because my son's health is the most important thing in the world to me, even if I haven't always acted like it. And if I let you continue this arrangement, I'm taking a risk that could end with Owen hurt and me facing a lawsuit from my own negligence." "I understand." Marcus met her eyes. "If you want me to stop, I'll stop. I'll go back to being just the janitor, do my actual job, and never touch Owen again. It'll break his heart and mine, but I understand that you have to protect your child. That's what parents do." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Victoria thought about Owen's face that morning, the way he glowed when talking about Captain Flexibility. She thought about Maria taking 5 steps, about the mother who'd wept with joy, about the dozen families who'd left this rundown community center tonight with a little more hope than they'd arrived with. She thought about her own failure to be present for her son's suffering, and about this man who'd stepped into that void not for money or recognition, but because he couldn't not do it, because Elena had taught him that every child deserves a champion. I want you to come back to work tomorrow, Victoria said slowly, working through the decision as she spoke. But not as my janitor, as Owen's private movement specialist. I'll have my lawyers draw up proper contracts, liability waivers, whatever paperwork we need to make this legal. I'll pay you what I pay the other therapists. Actually, I'll pay you more, because you're better. And I want to fund this program here at St. Catherine's. New equipment, building renovations, a salary for you so you can quit whatever other jobs you're working. Marcus stared at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. Mrs. Sterling, I can't. You can and you will. Victoria's voice took on the decisive tone she used in boardrooms when she'd made up her mind and wouldn't be swayed. Consider it payment for services already rendered. 6 months of work you've done for free, transforming my son's life while I was too blind to notice. And if you're worried about owing me something, don't be. This is a transaction. You provide expertise, I provide resources. It's what I'm good at. But the look on Marcus's face suggested it wasn't that simple, that her offer carried implications neither of them were ready to examine. Before he could formulate a response, the door opened and a small blonde girl entered. 8 years old, with Marcus's blue eyes and features, carrying a worn sketchbook under one arm. Daddy? The girl's voice was soft, uncertain. Are you ready to go home? Marcus's entire demeanor changed, opening up in a way Victoria had never seen. Hey, sweetheart, come here, I want you to meet someone. He held out his hand and the girl approached cautiously, not making eye contact. Lily, this is Mrs. Sterling. She's Owen's mom, the boy I've been telling you about. Lily considered this information, then looked somewhere past Victoria's left shoulder. Owen is the one who can't walk much. Daddy helps him. That's right. Victoria kept her voice gentle, instinctively understanding that sudden movements or too direct engagement might overwhelm this child. Your daddy is very good at helping people. Lily processed this, then opened her sketchbook and held it out. I drew this. It's Owen and Daddy. They're doing exercises. Victoria looked at the drawing, simple but expressive. 2 stick figures on a mat, one larger figure helping a smaller one who had wheels on his chair. The care in the details, the smile on Owen's face, the patient posture of Marcus made Victoria's chest tight. This is beautiful, Lily. Owen would love to see this. Would it be okay if I showed it to him? Lily finally made brief eye contact, just a flicker. You can keep it for Owen, so he knows someone thinks he's brave. And just like that, Victoria found herself crying in a rundown community center in East LA, holding a child's drawing, undone by the simple kindness of an 8-year-old girl who barely knew her son, but understood what he needed to hear. Marcus put his arm around his daughter. Come on, Lily Bear, let's go home. We'll talk more tomorrow, Mrs. Sterling. Figure out the details. Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched them leave, this man who worked as a janitor but should have been a doctor, and his daughter who saw the world differently but saw it with such clarity. And she understood that something fundamental had shifted tonight. She'd come here planning to gather information, assess the situation, make a rational decision. Instead, she'd witnessed grace in action, had seen what it looked like when someone gave everything they had to serve others, and it had cracked open something in her that she'd locked away when Owen was diagnosed, when her marriage fell apart, when the world became too painful to face directly. Victoria drove home through the dark streets of Los Angeles, Lily's drawing on the passenger seat beside her, and for the first time in 2 years, she let herself feel the full weight of what she'd lost and what might still be salvaged. The house was still too large, still too empty, but when she got home, she didn't go to her office or her bedroom. She went to Owen's room, where the night nurse sat reading while her son slept, and she dismissed the nurse early. Then Victoria did something she hadn't done since Owen was a baby. She lay down on the bed beside him, careful not to wake him, and simply stayed there, listening to him breathe, feeling the rise and fall of his small chest, bearing witness to his existence in a way she hadn't allowed herself to do in months. Tomorrow she would call her lawyers, start the paperwork to hire Marcus officially, begin the process of funding the St. Catherine's program. Tomorrow she would face the board's questions about her commitment to Pinnacle, would have difficult conversations about restructuring her role, would begin the complicated work of figuring out how to be both CEO and present mother. But tonight she just lay beside her sleeping son, holding Lily's drawing, and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to become the person Owen needed her to be. Outside the window, Los Angeles glittered under a sky too light polluted for stars, beautiful and harsh, and full of impossible contrasts. Victoria closed her eyes and, for the first time in longer than she could remember, fell asleep without the weight of tomorrow's obligations pressing down on her, without the endless mental checklist of what she hadn't done, hadn't fixed, hadn't saved. For one night she simply was, a mother beside her son, a woman who'd seen something worth believing in, a person who'd made the choice to stop running from her own heart. Monday morning arrived with the weight of decisions made in the dark that looked different in daylight. Victoria woke at 5:30, her internal alarm trained by years of early conference calls with European markets, and lay still for a moment trying to remember why she felt different. Then it came back. Marcus, the community center, Lily's drawing still on her nightstand, the promise she'd made to transform her janitor into something legitimate, to fund a program in a neighborhood she'd never visited before last night. She reached for her phone, already composing the email to Diane Foster in her head. Her lawyer would resist, would list every liability concern, every reason this arrangement invited disaster. But Victoria had spent 12 years building Pinnacle by trusting her instincts about people, about opportunities others dismissed as too risky. Marcus Hayes was an opportunity disguised as a janitor, and Owen's face when he talked about Captain Flexibility was the only business case she needed. The email went out at 6 a.m. Diane needs you to draft employment contract for specialized medical services. Non-traditional credentials, will explain in person. Also exploring 501c3 structure for community program funding. Meeting today if possible. Victoria hit send before she could second-guess the decision, before the rational part of her brain could catalog all the ways this could backfire. Owen was still sleeping when Victoria checked his room at 6:30. The night nurse had left shift notes, stable vitals, restful sleep, no incidents. Victoria read the clinical language and felt the familiar distance it created, the way medical terminology turned her son into a patient, a collection of symptoms to be managed rather than a child to be known. She wondered if Marcus ever thought of Owen that way, or if his wife's death had taught him that people were always more than their diagnoses. Marcus arrived at 7 a.m. carrying a duffel bag instead of cleaning supplies. Victoria met him at the kitchen entrance, coffee already brewing, the morning sun slanting through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the pool and gardens. He hesitated in the doorway, clearly uncertain whether the previous night's conversation had been real or something he'd imagined. "Come in, I meant what I said yesterday. We're making this official." Relief and apprehension crossed his face in equal measure. "Mrs. Sterling, I've been thinking about your offer all night. It's incredibly generous, but I need you to understand what you're getting into. I don't have the credentials most people expect. If word gets out that you hired someone without proper licensing to treat your son, the media will have a field day. Your company's reputation could suffer." Victoria poured 2 cups of coffee, added cream to hers, left his black because she'd noticed that detail at St. Catherine's. "My company's reputation survived me divorcing my husband, survived rumors I slept my way to CEO, survived 3 hostile takeover attempts. I think it can survive me hiring someone qualified to help my son, regardless of what letters come after his name." The words landed harder than she'd intended, exposing the defensiveness she'd learned to wield like armor. Marcus accepted the coffee, his calloused hands wrapping around the expensive porcelain mug that probably cost more than he made in a day of janitorial work. "I have one condition." His voice was steady despite the nervous energy radiating from his posture. "Lily comes here after school. She'll need a quiet space, somewhere she can decompress without feeling overwhelmed. And I need to be available if she has a meltdown or needs me. Owen's care is important, but Lily comes first. Always." The protectiveness in his tone made Victoria think of her own father, dead 26 years now, who'd built his modest accounting practice around being home for dinner every night, who'd never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference, even when it meant turning down lucrative clients. Her father would have liked Marcus, she thought, would have recognized the same stubborn insistence on putting family before career advancement, the same willingness to accept less money and status, if it meant being present for the people who mattered. We'll convert the library into a space for Lily. Victoria's mind was already redesigning the room. Soft lighting, noise-dampening curtains, a corner with art supplies since the girl clearly loved to draw. I'll hire a tutor to help with homework if she needs it, someone who specializes in autism spectrum support. She doesn't need fixing. Marcus's jaw tightened, the first real anger Victoria had seen from him. She needs acceptance and patience and people who don't try to make her neurotypical. I won't let anyone, no matter how well-intentioned, make Lily feel like who she is isn't enough. The rebuke stung because it was deserved. Victoria had spent 2 years trying to fix Owen, throwing money at specialists who promised improvement, secretly hoping each new treatment might reverse what couldn't be reversed. She'd been so focused on curing that she'd forgotten about accepting, about loving her son as he was, rather than mourning who he'd never be. You're right, I apologize. A tutor for support, not for changing her. Someone who understands that different isn't broken. Marcus nodded, tension easing from his shoulders. Then we have an agreement. When do you want me to start? Today. This morning. After we talk to Owen together and explain that your role is changing. Victoria set down her coffee cup, decision crystallizing into action the way it always did once she committed to a path. He needs to understand this isn't temporary, that you're not going anywhere. They found Owen awake in bed, propped against pillows, watching morning cartoons on his tablet. His face lit up when Marcus appeared in the doorway carrying the duffel bag, then showed confusion when Victoria followed, both adults looking serious and purposeful instead of casual. Owen, sweetheart, we need to talk to you about something important. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed while Marcus pulled up the chair from Owen's desk, positioning himself at the boy's eye level the way he always did, refusing to tower over someone already feeling powerless. Am I in trouble? Owen's green eyes darted between them, trying to read the situation. No, buddy, nothing like that. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on knees, his whole body language radiating reassurance. Actually, it's good news. Really good news. Your mom and I talked, and we've decided that instead of me being the janitor who cleans your house, I'm going to be your official movement specialist. That means I'll be here every day, specifically to work with you, to help you get stronger. Owen processed this information with the seriousness of someone accustomed to adults making decisions about his life without his input. What about cleaning? Who's going to do that? Victoria felt a flash of amusement at her son's priorities. We'll hire someone else for cleaning. Marcus's only job now is helping you. The boy's face scrunched in thought. Does this mean I won't see you as much? Because you'll be too busy being important? The question revealed a child's understanding of how the world worked. Important people had less time, not more, for the messy reality of daily life. Victoria watched Marcus absorb the concern, saw him choose his words with the care of someone who understood that promises to children were sacred contracts. Actually, it means the opposite. I'll be here more, not less. In the mornings before you wake up, I'll be planning your exercises. During the day, we'll work together. And at night, after Lily goes to bed, I'll be studying new techniques to help you. Being your specialist means you become my focus, Owen. My most important job. Owen looked at his mother, seeking confirmation. Really? Marcus isn't lying? He's not lying. I'm paying him to make you his priority. Victoria reached out and smoothed her son's curls soft beneath her palm. And I'm going to be here more too. I'm cutting back my hours at the office so I can be home every afternoon, working with both of you, learning what Marcus is teaching you. The hope that bloomed across Owen's face was almost painful to witness, joy tempered by the caution of someone who'd been disappointed before. Every day? You'll be home every day? Every day, Victoria promised, and felt the weight of that commitment settle across her shoulders like a physical thing. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably Robert Chen wondering why she'd canceled today's strategy meeting. But she ignored it, keeping her attention fixed on her son's face. What about Lily? Owen's social awareness, the way he considered others, even in moments focused on himself, reminded Victoria of her father again. Will she come here too? She will. Marcus's voice carried warmth and pride. In fact, I was hoping you two could spend time together after school. Lily doesn't have many friends. Other kids don't always understand her, but I think you would. You both know what it's like when your body doesn't work the way you want it to, when people look at you like you're different. I'd like that. Owen's enthusiasm was genuine, untainted by pity or obligation. I could show her my tablet games. Does she like trains? She loves drawing trains. Marcus smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his features from tired to luminous. You two are going to get along great. After Owen was settled with breakfast, the morning nurse handling feeding assistance, while Victoria supervised, actually present instead of absent. Marcus and Victoria retreated to her home office to discuss logistics. The room was all glass and chrome, designed to project power and control, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the infinity pool and the Los Angeles skyline beyond. Marcus stood by the window, taking in the view with the expression of someone from a different world temporarily visiting this one. Diane's coming at noon to start the contracts. Victoria pulled up her calendar on the desktop computer, already blocking out afternoon hours. We'll need to discuss salary, benefits, schedule. What were you making between the janitorial work and other jobs? Marcus turned from the window, discomfort clear on his face. About $40,000 a year total. 3 different employers, no benefits, no stability. The number was so far below what Victoria paid for services she considered basic that she had to recalculate to make sure she'd heard correctly. That's unconscionable. You have a bachelor's degree and years of experience. The degree doesn't matter without the clinical hours, and experience as a caregiver doesn't translate to credentials the system recognizes. Marcus shrugged, the gesture of someone who'd stopped fighting an unfair reality. I made it work. Lily never went hungry. Rent got paid. That's what matters. Your salary here will be $120,000 annually, full benefits, 4 weeks paid vacation. Victoria typed numbers into a spreadsheet, watching them populate across columns. You'll work 30 hours per week with Owen, leaving time for Lily and for the St. Catherine's program. Speaking of which, I want to establish a nonprofit foundation to fund the community center properly. You'll be the medical director with full operational control, Mrs. Sterling. Marcus stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was offering. Call me Victoria. If you're going to be working this closely with my family, the formality is unnecessary. She saved the spreadsheet, sent a copy to Diane for review. I've also been thinking about your educational goals. You mentioned needing clinical hours for proper licensing. USC has a weekend master's program in pediatric physical therapy, 18 months designed for working professionals. I'll cover tuition if you're interested. The offer hung between them, so far beyond the transactional relationship of employer and employee that Marcus seemed unable to formulate a response. Victoria understood the feeling. She'd built her career on clear boundaries between professional and personal, on keeping people at arm's length where they couldn't complicate her carefully structured life. But Owen's diagnosis had already shattered that structure, and Marcus's appearance in their lives felt less like disruption and more like a piece clicking into place that she hadn't known was missing. Why are you doing this? Marcus's voice carried genuine confusion rather than suspicion. I understand hiring me to help Owen, that benefits your son, but funding St. Catherine's, paying for my education, that's not about Owen anymore. What do you get out of it? Victoria considered several diplomatic answers, the kind of response she'd give at a board meeting when asked about philanthropic initiatives, community investment, social responsibility, corporate values alignment. But something about Marcus's directness, the way he refused to accept easy explanations, pulled truth from her that she hadn't planned to speak. My father died when I was 16. Heart attack, no warning, just gone. He was an accountant, middle class, nothing special by most people's standards. But he taught me that how you spend your time is how you spend your life, and that money is only meaningful if you use it to do something that matters. I built Pinnacle to prove I could, to show everyone who said I wasn't smart enough, or ambitious enough, or ruthless enough that they were wrong. And I succeeded beyond what anyone expected, including myself. She paused, organizing thoughts she'd never articulated even to herself. But somewhere in the process of building an empire, I lost track of why I wanted it in the first place. I convinced myself that providing for Owen meant paying for the best care, that being a good mother meant ensuring he had every advantage money could buy. Then you showed up, someone with nothing except skill and compassion and stubborn refusal to let circumstances dictate what you could offer. And you gave my son something I couldn't buy. You gave him hope. So when you ask what I get out of funding your work, the answer is, I get to remember what my father tried to teach me. That money isn't the point. What you do with it is. The confession left Victoria feeling exposed, vulnerable in a way she usually only felt during those dark 3 a.m. moments when sleep wouldn't come and all the walls she'd built couldn't keep out the questions she didn't want to answer. Marcus watched her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held his gaze, refusing to apologize for honesty. Your father sounds like he was a good man. Marcus's voice was soft, careful, like he understood the gift she'd given him by sharing this. Elena used to say something similar, that we're not defined by what we accumulate, but by what we give away. She lived that philosophy every day, gave away her time and expertise to families who couldn't afford her services, always believed that healing was a calling, not a career. The implicit comparison between Victoria's father and Elena created a bridge between them, a shared foundation of values inherited from people who'd shaped them into who they'd become. Victoria found herself wondering what her father would think of Marcus, whether he'd recognize in this younger man the same commitment to living according to principles rather than profit margins. The moment was interrupted by Victoria's phone erupting with calls. Robert Chen, Sarah, her assistant, board member Judith Klein, all trying to reach her during what should have been the strategy meeting she'd canceled. Victoria silenced the device, but the intrusion reminded both of them that the world outside this office had expectations and obligations that couldn't be indefinitely ignored. I need to handle some fires at work. Victoria stood, transitioning back into executive mode. Make yourself comfortable here while I take these calls. We'll meet with Diane at noon, get the paperwork started. And Marcus, thank you for taking a chance on this arrangement. I know it's unconventional. Thank you for seeing past the janitor to what I could offer. Marcus moved toward the door, then paused. Owen's lucky to have a mother who's willing to admit when she's been wrong and who's strong enough to change. That's rarer than you might think. He left before Victoria could respond, which was probably fortunate because she wasn't sure what she would have said. The compliment felt unearned given how many months she'd spent being absent, but the part about being strong enough to change struck deeper. Strength was supposed to mean not needing to change, maintaining control regardless of circumstance. But maybe real strength was recognizing when you'd been moving in the wrong direction and having the courage to correct course, even when it meant admitting you'd been lost. The calls with her executive team consumed the next 2 hours. Robert Chen was concerned about leadership stability, wanted assurances that Victoria wasn't having some kind of breakdown. Judith Klein, the board member who'd been with Pinnacle since its startup days, was more direct. You've been checked out for months, Victoria. Now you're suddenly canceling meetings and talking about reducing hours. The other board members are worried. They're starting to use phrases like succession planning and interim CEO. The threat was clear but not unexpected. Victoria had spent enough time in corporate politics to know that perceived weakness invited challenges, that the moment you showed vulnerability, competitors started circling. But for the first time in her career, the prospect of losing her position didn't trigger the panic response she'd expected. Instead, she felt something closer to relief. Tell the board I'll address their concerns at Thursday's meeting. Victoria kept her voice level, professional. In the meantime, I'm delegating more operational authority to Robert. He's been ready for expanded responsibility. This is a good opportunity to demonstrate his capabilities. And Judith, I'm not having a breakdown. I'm reprioritizing. There's a difference. After the call ended, Victoria sat in her office chair. Ergonomic, expensive, designed to support the body through long hours of sitting, and realized she'd just signaled her willingness to step back from day-to-day control of Pinnacle. The company she'd built from a small software firm into a $2 billion tech conglomerate, the achievement she'd sacrificed her marriage and her relationship with Owen to create, no longer felt like the most important thing in her life. The realization should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like permission. Diane Foster arrived at 11:30, early as always, carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month before Victoria's offer. The lawyer was 55, whip smart, with silver hair cut in a severe bob that made her look perpetually prepared for battle. She guided Victoria through the divorce, through hostile acquisition attempts, through every legal landmine that came with building an empire. If anyone could make the Marcus arrangement legally defensible, it was Diane. They met in the formal dining room, rarely used, designed in more for showing off than actual meals, with Marcus looking uncomfortable in one of the high-backed chairs that probably cost $5,000 each. Diane spread contracts across the mahogany table, her expression making clear what she thought of this entire situation. I've drafted 2 agreements. The first is a standard employment contract with some unconventional modifications. Diane pulled out a thick document, flagged with colored tabs. You're hiring Mr. Hayes as a pediatric movement specialist, which is vague enough to avoid making specific claims about medical credentials. The job description focuses on physical fitness, coaching, and mobility support rather than therapy or treatment. Legally, it's equivalent to hiring a personal trainer. That feels dishonest. Marcus spoke up for the first time since they'd sat down. I'm not a personal trainer. I have actual medical knowledge and therapeutic training, which you cannot legally practice without proper licensing. Diane's tone was crisp but not unkind. What I'm creating here is a framework that protects both you and Victoria from liability while allowing you to work with Owen. You'll have to be careful about terminology. You're teaching exercises, not prescribing treatment. You're supporting mobility, not conducting therapy. It's a distinction that matters in court. Victoria watched Marcus's jaw tighten, saw him struggling with the requirement to diminish his expertise, to hide behind euphemisms that made his work sound less significant than it was. The system that had rejected him 67 times was now forcing him to pretend he was less qualified than he actually was. And the injustice of it made Victoria's hands curl into fists beneath the table. What about the foundation for St. Catherine's? Victoria redirected before the conversation could spiral into frustration. Can we structure it to allow Marcus legitimate medical director authority? That's the second agreement. Diane produced another document. I'm proposing a 501c3 nonprofit called the Elena Hayes Foundation for Pediatric Movement Support. Victoria serves as founding board chair, Marcus as medical director and primary service provider. The foundation's mission is providing movement support services to underserved children with disabilities. Again, we're avoiding clinical terminology, but the structure gives Marcus legitimate authority and provides nonprofit protection. The mention of Elena's name made Marcus's breath catch. You want to name it after my wife? I think it's appropriate. Victoria met his eyes across the table. She's the reason you do this work. Her legacy should be recognized. Marcus looked down at the contract, and Victoria saw his shoulders tremble slightly, the only sign of the emotion he was fighting to control. Elena would have loved this. She always dreamed of starting a nonprofit, but we could never afford it. The startup costs alone, the legal fees, insurance, equipment, it was impossible. It's not impossible now. Diane's voice softened fractionally. I've structured the foundation with a $2 million endowment from Victoria's personal funds. That should cover operations for at least 5 years, including salaries for Marcus and support staff, facility improvements, equipment purchases, and liability insurance. $2 million. Marcus repeated the number like he was testing whether it was real. That's more money than I've made in my entire life. It's an investment, not charity. Victoria kept her tone businesslike to avoid making this feel like pity. The foundation will serve real needs in an underserved community. It's exactly the kind of initiative Pinnacle claims to value in our corporate social responsibility reports. This just happens to be directed by someone who actually knows what he's doing instead of some nonprofit that spends 80% of funding on administration. The practicality of the explanation seemed to help Marcus accept what was being offered. He picked up the contract, reading through pages of legal language with careful attention. Victoria watched him, noting the way he absorbed information, the questions he asked Diane about specific clauses, the intelligence that circumstances had prevented him from fully deploying. In another life, with different breaks and better timing, Marcus Hayes would have been running his own practice, would have been the specialist other specialists consulted. Instead, he'd spent the past few years cleaning floors and being rejected by people who couldn't see past their own limited definitions of qualified. I have some requests for modifications. Marcus looked up from the contract. The foundation needs to prioritize families below 200% of the federal poverty line. Free services, no income verification required. We operate on an honor system. And I want a provision that no child is ever turned away for behavioral issues. Some of these kids have meltdowns, aggression, difficulties that make other programs refuse them. That's exactly who needs help most. Diane made notes on her legal pad. Reasonable requests. I'll add language about inclusive services and non-discrimination. Anything else? I want Elena's name on the building once we renovate. Marcus's voice was quiet but firm. Not just in the paperwork, but physically. A sign, a plaque, something permanent that says she mattered, that her work continues. Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that what they were building together was about more than just Owen or the children at St. Catherine's. It was about honoring people who'd given everything they had to serve others, about creating legacy that outlasted the short, brutal time anyone got on Earth. Her father would have understood. Elena would have understood. The board members at Pinnacle, with their focus on quarterly returns and shareholder value, would never get it. But Victoria realized with startling clarity that she no longer cared what they thought. Done. Diane marked another note. We'll commission a proper memorial once renovations are complete. Now, regarding the employment contract for work with Owen, I need both of you to understand the limitations. If Owen is injured during activities with Marcus, even accidentally, you could face lawsuits from your ex-husband, scrutiny from Child Protective Services, media coverage that could damage both your reputations. The waiver I've drafted provides some protection, but it's not absolute. I understand the risks. Victoria signed the contract without hesitation. I'm choosing to accept them. Marcus signed as well, his signature less confident but equally committed. If something goes wrong, I take full responsibility. Victoria shouldn't suffer consequences for my actions. That's legally meaningless, but noted for the record. Diane gathered the signed contracts, sliding them into her portfolio. I'll file these today, get the foundation paperwork submitted to the IRS for tax-exempt status. You should be operational within 60 days, though you can start activities immediately under Victoria's personal umbrella while the nonprofit processes. After Diane left, Victoria and Marcus sat in the too formal dining room, surrounded by expensive furniture and artwork that meant nothing, and let the magnitude of what they just committed to settle over them. In the span of 48 hours, they transformed from employer and employee with a secret arrangement into partners in something that felt momentous, like they were constructing a bridge between worlds that rarely connected. Wealth and need, privilege and struggle, the life Victoria had built and the life Marcus had survived. We should tell Owen. Marcus broke the silence. He should know this is real, that it's not going to disappear. They found Owen in the converted therapy room that used to be the medical wing, working with one of the day nurses on basic stretches. The nurse was competent, but mechanical, going through prescribed motions without the engagement Marcus brought to every interaction. Owen's face when he saw them was polite but distant, the expression of a child accustomed to adults coming and going on schedules that had nothing to do with his needs. Hey, buddy. Marcus knelt beside the mat where Owen lay. Good news, everything's official. I'm officially your movement specialist now, which means I'll be here every single day. Starting when? Owen's cautiousness revealed how many times he'd been promised things that didn't materialize. Starting right now. Marcus glanced at the nurse, who took the hint and excused herself. How about we try something new today? Something we've never done before? The spark of interest in Owen's eyes was the reward Marcus had been hoping for. What kind of something? I've been working on an exercise sequence I think you are ready for. It's challenging, probably the hardest thing we've tried, but I believe you can do it. Marcus pulled equipment from his duffel bag, resistance bands, foam blocks, a small therapy ball. We're going to work on core strength and balance. The goal is to get you sitting up unassisted for 30 seconds. 30 seconds doesn't sound very long. Owen watched Marcus arrange the equipment with interest. For someone with your condition, 30 seconds of unassisted sitting is like climbing a mountain. Marcus positioned Owen carefully on the mat. Your core muscles have weakened because of the disease, so your body has to work extra hard to hold you upright. But I've noticed you're getting stronger. I think you're ready." Victoria watched from her position near the door as Marcus guided Owen through a sequence of exercises that looked deceptively simple but clearly required intense concentration from her son. Each movement built on the previous one, strengthening specific muscle groups, teaching Owen's body to compensate for weaknesses with strategic positioning. And through it all, Marcus narrated what he was doing and why, treating Owen as a collaborator in his own treatment rather than a passive recipient of care. "Feel that?" Marcus's hand pressed against Owen's lower back. "That's your erector spinae muscle firing. It's working to keep your spine straight." "Good, really good. Now we're going to add a small challenge. I'm going to take my hand away for 5 seconds, and you're going to hold this position on your own." Owen's face scrunched in concentration. Every ounce of his attention focused on the task. Marcus removed his supporting hand and Owen held 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds before starting to topple. Marcus caught him smoothly, easing him into a resting position. "Outstanding. You held for 5 seconds on the first try. Do you know how impressive that is? Did I do good?" Owen's need for validation, for proof that his efforts mattered, made Victoria's throat constrict. "You did incredible. We're going to practice that every day this week, and by Friday, I bet you'll hit 10 seconds. By next month, we're going to reach that 30-second goal. I promise." After the session ended and Owen was settled with lunch, Victoria followed Marcus to the kitchen. She'd been present for the entire hour, watching her son work harder physically than she'd ever seen him work, and the experience had been simultaneously inspiring and humbling. Marcus had a gift that transcended technical knowledge. He made Owen believe he was capable of things that seemed impossible, and that belief translated into actual progress. That was remarkable. Victoria poured them both water from the refrigerator dispenser. "The way you build his confidence while pushing him, the balance between challenge and support, I've never seen the other therapists do anything like that, because most therapists are taught to be clinical, to maintain professional distance." Marcus accepted the water, drinking half the glass before continuing. "Elena used to say that the best therapy happens when you stop treating the condition and start treating the person. Owen doesn't need someone to manage his Duchenne. He needs someone to see him as Owen first, someone who believes he's more than his diagnosis." The distinction was subtle but profound. Victoria had spent 2 years focused on Owen's disease, on slowing its progression, on preparing for inevitable decline. Marcus was focused on Owen's life, on maximizing what was possible right now, on refusing to let the future steal joy from the present. It was a fundamental difference in philosophy that explained why Owen responded to Marcus in ways he never had to the expensive specialists. Lily's school lets out at 3:15. Marcus glanced at the kitchen clock. "I usually pick her up myself, but if I'm working here, I'll have my driver collect her and bring her here." Victoria was already pulling up her phone. "We'll need information about her school, any specific pickup protocols. She gets overwhelmed easily during transitions." Marcus's protectiveness emerged again, that fierce parental vigilance. "The driver will need to give her a few minutes to adjust to a new person, not rush her, and she'll need to bring her noise-canceling headphones. The car ride can be overstimulating. I'll make sure the driver understands." Victoria made notes, adding this to the growing list of accommodations they were building into their new normal. "Does Lily have dietary restrictions?" "I want to make sure there's appropriate food available when she's here." "No restrictions, but she's particular about textures. Crunchy foods usually work better than soft." Marcus ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Victoria was learning meant he was anxious. "I know this is asking a lot, having a child with special needs in your home every day. My home is about to have 2 children with special needs every day." Victoria met his eyes directly. "Lily is welcome here, Marcus, not as an obligation I'm tolerating, but as someone I want Owen to know. He needs friends, and from what you've described, so does she." The afternoon passed in a blur of logistics. Victoria coordinating with the driver service, preparing the library space for Lily with softer lighting and art supplies, briefing the household staff about the changes. She called her assistant Sarah and officially cleared her schedule from 3 p.m. onward every day, prompting questions about whether everything was all right that Victoria deflected with vague references to family priorities. When the driver arrived with Lily at 3:45, Victoria watched from the living room window as Marcus went out to meet his daughter. The girl emerged from the town car slowly, clutching her sketchbook, wearing the noise-canceling headphones Marcus had mentioned. She didn't look at the house or acknowledge the driver's goodbye, just focused on her father with the intensity of someone for whom the world was often too much, and one safe person was everything. Marcus knelt to her level, speaking quietly, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Lily nodded, processed whatever he was saying, then followed him toward the house with small, careful steps. Victoria moved away from the window, not wanting to be caught watching, and positioned herself in the kitchen instead, maintaining distance until introductions were appropriate. "Lily, you remember Mrs. Sterling from the community center?" Marcus guided his daughter into the kitchen, his body language protective but not hovering. "She's Owen's mom, and she's invited you to spend time here after school while I work with Owen." Lily didn't make eye contact, didn't respond verbally, just stood holding her sketchbook like a shield against the unfamiliar environment. Victoria understood instinctively that silence wasn't rejection, but processing time, that pushing for interaction would only cause retreat. "I set up a space in the library where you can draw or read." Victoria kept her voice gentle, non-demanding. "There's art supplies if you want them, or you can use your own materials, whatever makes you comfortable." After a long moment, Lily asked, not quite at Victoria, but in her general direction, "Is Owen here? Can I meet him? He's resting in his room right now, but he's been asking about you." Marcus smoothed his daughter's hair, a habitual gesture of affection. "How about we get you settled in the library first, then if you're ready, we can introduce you properly?" The library transformation had happened quickly but effectively. The overhead lights dimmed, floor lamps providing softer illumination, a corner arranged with cushions and a low table for drawing, art supplies organized in clear bins so Lily could see options without being overwhelmed. When Marcus led his daughter into the space, her tension visibly decreased. She gravitated immediately to the art corner, setting down her sketchbook and examining the supplies with careful attention. "This is nice." Lily's voice was quiet but held genuine approval. "It's not too loud here. I'm glad you like it." Victoria stayed near the doorway, maintaining distance. "You can come here every day after school. Think of it as your space." Lily opened her sketchbook to a blank page, selected a pencil from the supplies, and began drawing with the focused absorption of someone shutting out the world to create. Marcus watched his daughter for a moment, satisfied she was settled, then indicated to Victoria that they should leave her to decompress in peace. In the hallway, Marcus's relief was obvious. "Thank you for understanding how to approach her. Most people try to force eye contact or get frustrated when she doesn't respond immediately. Owen's taught me that different doesn't mean wrong." Victoria surprised herself with the admission. "I've had to unlearn a lot of assumptions about how people should communicate, how they should interact. Lily and Owen probably understand each other better than either of them understands us." An hour later, after Lily had time to adjust and Owen had finished his rest period, Marcus engineered the introduction with careful attention to both children's needs. He brought Owen to the library in his wheelchair, knocked softly on the doorframe, waited for Lily to acknowledge their presence before entering. "Lily, this is Owen." Marcus made the introduction simple, without pressure. "Owen, this is my daughter Lily. She's been drawing pictures of you and me doing exercises." "You have?" Owen's face lit up with interest rather than self-consciousness. "Can I see?" Lily hesitated, then turned her sketchbook around to show a series of drawings. Stick figures in wheelchairs, larger figures helping smaller ones. Everyone smiling. The simplicity of the art couldn't disguise the care in the details. The wheels on Owen's chair perfectly round. The supportive hands of the larger figure gentle rather than controlling. The expressions on the faces hopeful rather than sad. "These are really good." Owen studied the drawings with genuine appreciation. "I like how you made me look strong, not sick." "You are strong." Lily's statement was matter of fact, not flattery. "My dad says you work really hard." That's strength. The direct honesty between the children, their lack of social filtering, created an immediate connection that adults with all their learned politeness couldn't have manufactured. Victoria watched Owen wheel himself closer to Lily's art corner, saw him point at the supplies and ask questions about what she liked to draw. Lily answered in her quiet, careful way, and Owen listened with the patience of someone who understood what it meant to need extra time. Marcus appeared beside Victoria in the doorway, both of them observing their children forge a friendship built on mutual understanding of what it meant to be different. They do get it, each other, I mean, better than we could explain it to them. Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. The image of the two children, one unable to walk, one struggling to connect, both finding acceptance in each other, felt like a glimpse of something pure that the adult world had forgotten how to offer. She thought of her father again, of Elena, of all the people who'd spent their lives trying to teach the lesson these children instinctively understood. That compassion wasn't complicated. That connection didn't require perfection. That sometimes the strongest bonds formed between people who'd learned to be gentle with brokenness because they carried their own. The first week of the new arrangement passed with the fragile hope of spring after a long winter, tentative, beautiful, vulnerable to sudden frost. Marcus arrived each morning at 7, worked with Owen until noon, spent afternoons with both children while Victoria learned to be present instead of productive. The household staff adapted to the changes with professional discretion, though Victoria caught curious glances when she sat on therapy mats in yoga pants instead of presiding over conference calls in tailored suits. Thursday brought the board meeting Victoria had been dreading. She drove to Pinnacle's headquarters in Century City, the glass tower she'd commissioned 5 years ago, as a monument to her company's dominance in enterprise software solutions. The building still impressed, 40 stories of steel and ambition, but Victoria found herself missing the cluttered warmth of St. Catherine's Community Center, the honest shabbiness of a place that prioritized purpose over presentation. The board convened at 9 in the executive conference room on the 40th floor, 8 men and 3 women who collectively controlled billions in assets and had very specific expectations about leadership commitment. Robert Chen sat to Victoria's right, his expression carefully neutral. Judith Klein was less diplomatic, her disapproval evident before the meeting even started. Victoria, we need to discuss your recent absence from day-to-day operations. Judith opened it without preamble. You've canceled 17 meetings in the past week, delegated critical decisions to subordinates, and informed Sarah you're unavailable after 3 p.m. daily. This isn't the leadership we've come to expect from you. My son has a progressive disease that will kill him before he's 30. Victoria's voice was calm but carried steel underneath. I've spent 2 years prioritizing this company over his remaining healthy years. I'm correcting that imbalance. No one's saying you shouldn't spend time with Owen. Robert's tone was conciliatory, the diplomat trying to prevent open warfare. But there are ways to be present for family without completely abandoning your responsibilities to the company and to shareholders. I haven't abandoned anything. I'm restructuring my role to be sustainable. Victoria pulled up a presentation on the room's display screens. I prepared a proposal to transition to executive chairman, with Robert assuming CEO responsibilities. I'll remain involved in strategic direction, but delegate operational management. The room erupted in overlapping voices, shock, objection, questions about succession planning and leadership stability. Victoria let them react, waited for the noise to subside before continuing. Her father had taught her that the person who could remain calm while others panicked held all the real power in any negotiation. This isn't a sudden decision made in crisis. Victoria advanced to the next slide, showing org charts and responsibility matrices she'd spent 3 nights preparing. I've been CEO for 8 years. In that time, Pinnacle's valuation increased 400%. We've successfully completed 6 acquisitions, and we've never missed earnings targets. I've earned the right to redefine my involvement. You've also earned shareholder trust that this change could damage. Judith wasn't backing down. If word gets out that our CEO is stepping back for personal reasons, the stock could drop 20% before lunch. Or it could rise because we're demonstrating depth of leadership in smooth succession planning. Victoria countered, Robert has been ready for this role for 2 years. This transition makes us stronger, not weaker. The debate continued for 90 minutes, Victoria defending her decision against challenges both reasonable and absurd. The men on the board framed their objections in terms of fiduciary responsibility and market confidence. But Victoria heard the underlying message. Women weren't supposed to choose family over career, weren't supposed to admit that perhaps world domination wasn't worth sacrificing everything else, weren't supposed to suggest that maybe they'd been wrong about what mattered. Finally exhausted and ready for this ordeal to end, Victoria played her final card. I'm not asking permission. I'm informing you of my decision and offering an orderly transition. If the board wants to force me out entirely, you have that option. I own 38% of shares. You collectively control 45%. But a hostile removal of the founder and CEO will create exactly the instability you're claiming to prevent. Or you can accept my proposal, let me transition gracefully into chairman role, and maintain continuity that benefits everyone. The implicit threat hung in the air. Victoria could make her removal expensive in public, could create media narratives about boards that punish female executives for prioritizing family, could turn this into a referendum on corporate values that Pinnacle would lose in the court of public opinion. She didn't want to go nuclear, but she would if pushed. Judith called for a private vote. Victoria waited outside the conference room for 27 minutes, watching Los Angeles spread beneath her through floor-to-ceiling windows. From 40 stories up, the city looked ordered and comprehensible, each building and street fitting into a larger pattern. From ground level, she knew it was chaos and struggle, beauty and ugliness tangled together in ways that made sense only to people living inside the mess. The door opened. Robert emerged, his face unreadable. The vote was 7-4 in favor of your proposal. You're officially executive chairman as of today. I'm interim CEO pending shareholder approval at next month's meeting. Relief and loss hit Victoria simultaneously. She'd built Pinnacle from nothing, had poured 12 years of 80-hour weeks into making it succeed, had sacrificed her marriage and her relationship with Owen in service of quarterly growth targets. Stepping back felt like amputation. Necessary but brutal, removing something that had become part of her identity. Congratulations. You've earned this. Victoria shook Robert's hand, meaning it despite the complicated emotions churning beneath her professional composure. I'll be available for strategic guidance, but operations are yours now. Driving back to Beverly Hills, Victoria felt unmoored in a way she hadn't experienced since her father's death 26 years earlier. Work had been her anchor, the thing that gave structure and meaning to her days. Without CEO responsibilities consuming her attention, she'd have to figure out who she was beyond titles and achievements, would have to learn how to measure her worth in ways that didn't appear on balance sheets or earnings reports. She arrived home to find Marcus in the pool area, the pool she'd been planning to drain, teaching both Owen and Lily water exercises. Marcus supported Owen in the shallow end while Lily sat on the steps, splashing experimentally. Victoria stood behind the glass doors, watching this scene she'd thought was lost forever. Her son in the water, laughing, his atrophied legs moving with assistance but moving nonetheless. Marcus noticed her and waved. Come join us. Water's perfect temperature. Victoria hadn't been in the pool since before Owen's diagnosis, hadn't owned a swimsuit in 2 years. But something about the invitation, about Marcus's assumption that she belonged in this moment, rather than observing from outside, made her turn around and head to her bedroom. Buried in the back of her closet, she found an old one-piece still with tags attached from some aspirational purchase she'd never used. The water was warm, heated to therapeutic temperature. Victoria slid in beside Marcus, took Owen's other side at his gestured instruction. Together they supported her son while his legs made small kicking motions. The movement assisted and limited, but real. The water helps with buoyancy. Marcus demonstrated how to position his hands to support without restricting Owen's effort. He can move more freely here than on land. It's excellent for maintaining range of motion and building endurance. Victoria followed his lead, her hands finding the right places to support Owen's small body. Her son's smile was incandescent, pure joy unmarked by self-consciousness or pain. When was the last time she'd touched him like this, had been physically present for his happiness rather than writing checks for others to create it? She couldn't remember, which felt like an indictment. Lily watched from the steps, still dressed in her school clothes, too overwhelmed by the new situation to join fully, but present nonetheless. Victoria made eye contact with the girl, offered a gentle smile that demanded nothing. Lily's return smile was tentative but genuine. They stayed in the pool for 40 minutes until Owen's energy flagged and Marcus called an end to the session before exhaustion could replace joy. Victoria helped wrap her son in towels, carried him inside while Marcus collected Lily, and for the first time in recent memory, Victoria felt like she was actually mothering rather than managing. That evening, after both children had eaten and Lily had been collected by the driver's service, Marcus reluctantly accepted, Victoria and Marcus sat in the kitchen over coffee. The house was quiet in that particular way houses are quiet when children sleep nearby. A peaceful silence different from the oppressive emptiness Victoria had grown accustomed to. The board approved my transition to chairman. Victoria wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, seeking warmth despite the mild California evening. Robert's interim CEO now. I'm officially sidelining my career for family reasons. How do you feel about that? Marcus asked. And Victoria appreciated that he didn't immediately congratulate her or assure her she'd made the right choice. He was simply asking her to examine her own reaction. Terrified, relieved, like I just stepped off a cliff and I'm not sure if I'm falling or flying. Victoria laughed, but it came out strained. I've been CEO for 8 years. Before that, I was climbing towards CEO for another 4. My entire adult life has been defined by professional achievement. Now I'm voluntarily stepping back, and I don't know who I am without the title. You're Owen's mother. Marcus's voice was quiet but certain. That's not a lesser identity. It's actually the most important role any of us ever get. Everything else is just what we do while we're figuring out how to be present for the people who need us. Elena used to tell you that. Victoria recognized the wisdom of someone who'd spent time thinking deeply about meaning and priority. Elena lived it. She was an extraordinary therapist, could have built a successful private practice, made real money, but she chose to work with underserved kids, took insurance reimbursements that barely covered costs, spent hours with families who couldn't pay at all. She used to say that resumes and bank accounts were just scorecards for games that didn't matter. What mattered was whether you made someone's life better by being in it. The philosophy was so fundamentally different from the values Victoria had absorbed in her climb to success that it felt almost subversive. Corporate America ran on the assumption that financial achievement was the ultimate measure of worth, that making money was identical to making meaning. Elena's alternative framework, that meaning came from service, that worth was measured in connections rather than accomplishments, threatened everything Victoria had built her identity around. I don't know how to measure success if it's not about achievement. Victoria admitted the fear beneath her confusion. How do you know if you're doing well, if you're enough, if you matter, without external validation? You watch your son smile. You see him try things he was afraid of yesterday. You witness him believing he's strong instead of broken. That's how you know. Marcus met her eyes across the table. The rest is just noise. Impressive noise, maybe, but ultimately it doesn't change what happens in your son's heart when he falls asleep at night. Does he feel loved? Does he believe he matters? Does he think his life has purpose, even though his body's betraying him? Those are the only questions that count, Victoria. Everything else is just distraction. The words landed with the force of revelation, stripping away layers of rationalization Victoria had built to justify her absence. She told herself that providing for Owen meant paying for excellent care, that being a good mother meant ensuring he had every advantage. But Owen didn't need advantages. He needed her attention, her presence, her willingness to sit with his suffering instead of outsourcing it to professionals. I've wasted 2 years, Victoria's voice cracked. 2 years I could have been present for him, learning what you just taught me in 2 weeks. How do I forgive myself for that? The same way I forgive myself for the years I spent working construction instead of finishing my degree, for the time I missed with Lily because I was too busy trying to earn money for her therapy. Marcus reached across the table, his hand covering hers, the contact warm and grounding. You do the best you can with what you know. When you know better, you do better. That's all any of us can manage. The touch lingered longer than professionally appropriate, his calloused palm against her soft skin creating a circuit of connection that felt dangerous and necessary simultaneously. Victoria didn't pull away, neither did Marcus. They sat in the quiet kitchen of her enormous house, 2 people from completely different worlds, joined by love for children who'd suffered and by their own failures to be who those children needed. The moment stretched until Marcus finally withdrew his hand, clearing his throat, stepping back from whatever precipice they had been approaching. I should go. Lily will be wondering why I'm late. After he left, Victoria climbed the stairs to Owen's room. Her son slept curled on his side, one hand tucked beneath his cheek, looking younger than 6 and unbearably fragile. She stood in the doorway watching him breathe, each rise and fall of his small chest a temporary victory against the disease slowly stealing his future. Tomorrow she would call the foundation lawyer, would accelerate the timeline for St. Catherine's renovations. She'd write the checks that would transform Marcus's volunteer program into something permanent and sustainable, would create the memorial to Elena that honored what the woman had valued instead of what society said mattered. And she'd keep showing up for Owen, keep learning from Marcus how to be present instead of productive, keep choosing connection over achievement even when it terrified her. But tonight, Victoria simply stood guard over her sleeping son, bearing witness to his existence the way her father had borne witness to hers before the heart attack stole him away. She thought about legacy, about what people left behind when they died. Her father had left accounting clients who'd forgotten him within a year, but he'd left a daughter who still heard his voice in her head 26 years later, still tried to live by the values he'd modeled. Elena had left no wealth or fame, but she'd left Marcus and Lily and a community of families whose children could move more freely because she'd believed they were worth the effort. What would Victoria leave? A tech company that would replace her within a year? Or a son who remembered that his mother finally learned to sit still long enough to really see him? The answer felt simultaneously obvious and terrifying, because choosing Owen, choosing presence over achievement, meant accepting that she'd been wrong about nearly everything she'd spent her adult life believing. It meant admitting that the corporate ladder she'd climbed so aggressively led nowhere that mattered. It meant recognizing that the person who'd saved her son was someone she'd barely noticed for 6 months because she'd been too busy being important to recognize what was actually significant. Victoria walked to Owen's bedside, knelt on the floor beside him, and rested her hand on his back, feeling the shallow movement of his breathing. "I'm here." She whispered the words into the darkness, a promise to her sleeping son and to herself. "I'm here now, and I'm not leaving again. Whatever time we have, however many years before this disease takes you from me, I'm going to be present for all of it. No more hiding, no more pretending work matters more than you do." Owen stirred in his sleep, his small hand reaching out blindly. Victoria caught it, held it gently, and stayed kneeling beside his bed until her legs cramped and her back ached, because physical discomfort was nothing compared to the pain of regret, and she'd already accumulated enough of that to last a lifetime. When she finally stood and left Owen's room, Victoria passed the library where Lily had spent the afternoon drawing. The art supplies were neatly organized. The girl had cleaned up before leaving, had restored order to a space Victoria had created for her. On the table sat a drawing Lily had left behind, perhaps deliberately. 2 houses, side by side, one large and one small, with figures in the windows waving at each other. Beneath it, in careful child handwriting, "Friends live in different places, but they still see each other." Victoria carried the drawing to her bedroom, propped it on her nightstand beside Lily's earlier picture of Marcus and Owen. These simple crayon sketches from an 8-year-old girl with autism contained more wisdom than every business strategy document Victoria had ever written. Connection transcended circumstance. Love wasn't about grand gestures but consistent presence. Family was what you built through daily choices, not what genetics assigned or what money could buy. She slept that night without the usual Ambien, without the white noise machine, without any of the pharmaceutical or technological solutions she'd deployed against insomnia. Instead, she lay in the darkness thinking about Marcus's hands supporting Owen in the pool, about Lily's careful drawing, about her father's voice across 26 years telling her that how you spend your time is how you spend your life. For the first time since Owen's diagnosis, Victoria fell asleep without feeling like she was failing, without the weight of everything she couldn't fix crushing her chest. She fell asleep feeling like maybe finally she was learning what it meant to be enough.